Picture this: San Francisco, perfect weather, and a fully functional Boeing 777. It seemed like a textbook landing was guaranteed. But what doomed Asiana Flight 214 wasn't a mechanical failure. It was a hidden trap in the autopilot's settings. Until the very last second, the pilots believed the automation was maintaining their speed, while the aircraft was actually plummeting. The price for this error and their over-reliance on the computer was the plane itself, and most tragically, 3 lives. How did smart electronics baffle an experienced crew, and why did it become a lesson for all of aviation? Let's break it down. Asiana Flight 214 is finishing its marathon journey. 10 monotonous hours over the Pacific Ocean from Seoul are behind it. Ahead lies the runway at San Francisco International Airport. On board the Boeing 777 are 291 passengers. The aircraft is in perfect working order. There's plenty of fuel. The weather is ideal. By all accounts, nothing suggests disaster. But the greatest enemy isn't outside. It's the human factor inside the cockpit. Their body clocks read 3:30 in the morning. It's the time when the body craves sleep, reaction times slow, and the ability to make complex decisions drops to a minimum. In the left commander's seat sits Lee Kang-kook. On paper, he's an aviation veteran with thousands of flight hours. But there's a catch. He spent almost his entire career flying Airbuses. On this giant Boeing, he's essentially a trainee. His experience flying this specific type of aircraft? Just 43 hours. It's a negligible amount. He's landing this type of plane at the challenging San Francisco airport for the very first time. Every move he makes right now is a test. To his right sits the instructor, Lee Jong-min, the one who's supposed to back up the novice and correct any mistake. But there's a twist here too. For the instructor, this is also a debut. He was certified to train others just 1 month ago and is flying in this role for the first time today. The result is a dangerous combination. At the controls is a pilot who isn't yet familiar with the plane, and supervising him is a man who isn't yet familiar with teaching. A heavy tension hangs in the cockpit. In Korean culture, the authority of a senior and a teacher is absolute, but here the roles are blurred. The trainee is afraid of appearing incompetent and losing face in front of his mentor. The instructor, in turn, doesn't want to intervene too early and undermine his colleague's confidence. They remain politely silent in situations that demand shouting. The plane begins its descent, and this politeness will soon prove fatal. In aviation, the most dangerous trap often looks like a perfect sunny day. San Francisco greets Flight 214 with a postcard view. A cloudless sky, a calm bay, and excellent visibility. The NorCal approach controller comes on the radio and gives an instruction that seems like a gift. Cleared for the visual approach to runway 28 left. No complicated procedures, no fog. Just look out the window, find the runway, and land the plane. But behind this simplicity lies a serious problem. Normally, airliners this size land as if on invisible rails. This is the ILS system, a radio beam that stretches from the runway into the sky. It captures the aircraft dozens of kilometers out and guides it precisely to the touchdown point, controlling both its heading and, crucially, its altitude. The pilot merely monitors as the smart machine slides down this electronic beam on its own. Today, those rails are dismantled. Construction is underway at the airport, and the glide slope beacon, the very component responsible for the vertical descent profile, is switched off. For a small private plane, this is no issue. But for a 200-ton Boeing 777, it changes all the rules. The crew is now stripped of its primary guide. They have no instrument telling them, "You're too low," or "You're too high." Captain Lee Kang-kook and instructor Lee Jong-min are forced to do something modern computer-era pilots have grown unaccustomed to: judge the correctness of their trajectory by eye. Imagine you're used to parking your car using a rear-view camera with trajectory lines. Today, the camera is covered, and you have to maneuver a huge truck into a narrow garage using only the mirrors, and at high speed. The crew accepts the conditions. They are calm. After all, the weather is perfect, and the runway is visible for miles. The pilots lean back in their seats, unaware that their brains, accustomed to digital cues, are already starting to lose this match. Without that electronic safety tether, the massive aircraft is left alone with the laws of physics and human judgment. The plane races toward San Francisco, and the instrument readings aren't promising. The airliner is above the calculated flight path and flying too fast. In aviation, this is called an energy surplus. Imagine you've pedaled a bicycle to the top of a steep hill, and the finish line is right at the bottom, but much closer than you anticipated. You need to both descend and brake at the same time. At this tense moment, a voice sounds in their headsets. Instead of help, the controller sets a firm condition. Maintain 180 knots until 5-mile final. It's an order. The pilots can't slow down right now, even though instinct tells them to. They need to stay fast while urgently losing altitude. Captain Lee Kang-kook realizes, if they do nothing, they'll fly over the runway at skyscraper height. He needs an emergency solution. The pilot reaches for the autopilot panel and presses the FLCH button, flight level change. It's one of the most aggressive descent modes. Simply put, the pilot orders the onboard computer. Dive down to reach 3,000 feet as quickly as possible, but don't drop the speed. The Boeing obediently lowers its nose. In the cabin, passengers might feel the floor tilt slightly beneath their feet. The 200-ton machine rushes toward the ground at a vertical speed exceeding comfortable limits. It's a standard maneuver. The aircraft is designed for it. But this decision comes at a cost. Time. The rapid dive consumes precious seconds the crew needs to assess the situation. Instead of smoothly creeping toward the runway, evaluating the wind and heading, they throw all their effort into battling the altimeter. The attention of both pilots, the trainee and the instructor, is now locked onto a single task: burn off the excess altitude. They watch the numbers counting down and believe the automation has the situation under control. But in this race against the schedule, they begin to lose sight of the bigger picture. At 3,000 feet, the plane stops its rapid descent. The autopilot has completed its task. It reached the assigned altitude and now levels the airliner out. But the pilot doesn't need level flight. He needs to continue descending toward the runway. And here, Lee Kang-kook performs an action that seems perfectly logical, but sets off a chain reaction. He disengages the autopilot. From this moment, the control yoke is in his hands, and he physically feels the resistance of the huge machine. To make the plane continue descending, the pilot takes hold of the engine thrust levers and pulls them all the way back. Thrust drops to a minimum. The engines enter idle mode, their roar fading to a whisper. It's like a driver taking their foot off the gas pedal on a downhill slope, letting the car coast on inertia. It's at this very second that the Boeing 777's onboard computer changes its behavior logic. On the primary flight display, right in front of the captain and instructor's eyes, a mode indicator lights up: hold. That 4-letter word is a sentence for the relaxed crew. In hold mode, the smart autothrottle, which usually safeguards pilots and automatically adds power if speed drops, simply disengages. It goes to sleep. The system interprets the pilot's action as, "You set the engines to minimum yourself, so you want to fly with minimum thrust. I won't intervene." But the crew doesn't know this. A belief ingrained by years of flying is firmly planted in the pilots' minds. Modern planes don't fall. They are confident the electronic guardian angel is still monitoring their speed. They think if the airliner slows to a dangerous limit, the computer will automatically wake up and apply takeoff power. This is called pilot error protection, and it exists almost everywhere, but not in hold mode. Silence hangs in the cockpit. By strict aviation rules, any change in mode on the display must be announced aloud. Thrust in hold. One pilot reads it, the other confirms. It's the law. But right now, no one utters a word. The instructor is busy looking for landmarks on the ground. The trainee is wrestling with the control yoke. The trap has sprung shut. The massive airliner is flying with its cruise control off. The engines are at idle, and the people in the cockpit believe the automation has their backs. Meanwhile, the kinetic energy of the 200-ton machine begins to dissipate at an alarming rate, but in the cockpit, no one notices. Sometimes, silence in a cockpit is more terrifying than any alarm. At 1,600 feet, inside Flight 214, it's exactly that kind of ominous quiet. No shouting, no panic. Just the occasional short, clipped phrase of a command. Captain Lee Kang-kook is completely absorbed in one task. He's trying to align the giant machine with the runway's center line. The plane has drifted slightly to the side, and the pilot sees the concrete strip ahead, veering a bit left, then a bit right. His brain is working like a camera lens focused on a single distant point, blurring everything else. He turns the control yoke, his eyes glued to the windshield. He believes that if he can just catch the heading, everything else will fall into place. In the neighboring seat sits the instructor. His direct duty is to look not out the window, but at the instruments. He should be the one to say, "Hey, we're losing energy." But the magic of the visual approach is working on him too. Instead of scanning the control panel, the instructor is also looking outside, checking how the trainee is handling the maneuvers. At this moment, the crew falls into the rigid grip of so-called tunnel vision, a state where, under stress, a person physically stops noticing peripheral details. The pilots see the runway, they see the water of the bay, but they completely ignore the most critical thing, the speed tape on the left side display. And there, a catastrophe is unfolding. The target speed for landing is 137 knots. The numbers betray them, sliding down. 135, 130, 128 knots. The heavy airliner begins to slow in the air. The thrust levers remain all the way back at idle power. Normally, they'd start moving on their own, the autothrottle kicking in to add thrust. Pilots are used to seeing that movement from the corner of their eye. But today, the levers are dead still. The plane becomes a 200-ton inertia projectile. It's still moving forward, but with every second, the air holds its wings less and less. The giant bird weakens, ready to drop like a stone, while the people in the cockpit continue their gentle parking, oblivious to the void that has opened beneath them. In aviation, there is an altitude that serves as the final defensive line, 500 feet. That's about 150 meters above the ground. At this point, the crew must run a strict checklist: gear down, flaps set, and crucially, the aircraft must be flying stable, as if on rails. If any parameter is off, the rule is ironclad. Go around. No, let me try to fix it, or we'll just correct it. Flight 214 crosses this invisible line with a violation. To the left of the runway stand the PAPI lights, 4 powerful beacons shining red or white, telling pilots their descent angle. The perfect picture is 2 white, 2 red. But right now, the crew sees 3 red lights and only 1 white. It's an alarm signal. You are too low. But the most terrifying thing isn't happening with altitude, it's with speed. It falls to 134 knots and continues to bleed away. The airliner lacks the energy to stay in the air. To compensate, the giant Boeing instinctively raises its nose. It's physics. Without engine thrust, the wing needs a greater angle of attack to generate lift. But the higher the nose goes, the greater the air resistance, and the faster the speed decays. It's a vicious cycle, an uncontrollable energy bleed that the plane is pulling itself into. In the right seat sits instructor Lee Jong-min. He sees the 3 red lights. He understands the flight profile is breaking apart. Here, an invisible yet powerful enemy enters the cockpit: hierarchy. Lee Jong-min earned his instructor's license just 1 month ago. Next to him sits the captain, older and with immense authority in the airline. In Asian communication culture, bluntly correcting a senior is a serious psychological barrier. The instructor should command speed or grab the yoke, but he hesitates. He gives his colleague another couple of seconds to correct the mistake himself. But there is no one to correct it. The pilot's gaze is locked on the runway asphalt, while the instructor's eyes dart between the runway and the red PAPI lights. Neither of them looks at the most crucial instrument, the speed tape. It's right in front of them, at arm's length. There, in the lower left corner of the display, the needle descends into the yellow, then into the red band. The plane is no longer flying. It's balancing on the edge of a stall, yet there is still no alarm sound, no movement of the throttle levers in the cockpit. Precious time runs out in silence. At 11:27 and 42 seconds, the illusion of safety shatters. A sound echoes through the cockpit that chills any pilot's spine, not a human cry, but the sharp, emotionless voice of the onboard computer. The warning system literally screams what the crew refused to notice. Speed has dropped to 118 knots. For a heavy Boeing, this is the critical line. At this speed, the wings can no longer hold the machine in the air. The airplane becomes a dropped stone. Instructor Lee Jong-min finally snaps out of his stupor. He sees those terrible numbers and makes the only possible move. He slams the thrust levers forward, pushing them to the firewall. He needs all the engine power, right now, this instant. But at that same moment, Captain Lee Kang-kook, at the controls, makes a tragic mistake. Seeing the water rushing up, he reflexively pulls the yoke toward him. His instinct screams, "Raise the nose to avoid falling." But without thrust, this action works exactly opposite. Raising the nose exposes the wide belly of the plane to the oncoming airflow. It acts like a giant air brake, finally killing off the remaining speed. And here, the relentless laws of physics take over. The pilots face a phenomenon engineers call spool-up lag. Turbines this size cannot spin up instantly like a race car engine. They need to ingest a huge volume of air, compress it, and burn fuel to reach takeoff thrust. This takes between 5 to 7 seconds. It's the most terrifying timer of their lives. The thrust levers are already at maximum. The pilots are pressed into their seats, waiting for the engines to deliver full power. But the plane doesn't respond. The engines just begin their low, building hum, slowly spinning up the heavy blades. 1 second. 2. 3. The airliner continues to fall on inertia. The command for rescue has been given. The electronics have signaled the fuel pumps, but gravity works faster than mechanics. The huge shadow of the plane already covers the seawall, while the life-saving thrust is still on its way, delayed by exactly the moments that separate a scare from a disaster. The yoke in the captain's hands suddenly turns into a jackhammer. A mechanical vibration roar fills the cockpit. The stick shaker activates, the system that shakes the control column. It's the plane's last, most brutal way of screaming at the people. "You are stalling." Lift has vanished. At the height of a 5-story building, the 200-ton machine hangs in the air only by inertia. The airspeed indicator shows just 103 knots. That's 60 kilometers an hour slower than what's needed to survive. At this moment, one of the pilots sharply commands, "Go around!" It's the correct command, but it sounds in that temporal pocket where nothing can be fixed anymore. The engines roar, trying to pull the airliner up, but the landing geometry is already broken. The plane's nose is pitched too high, and the heavy tail hangs down like an anchor. It drops below the level of the runway. At 11:27 and 50 seconds, impact occurs. This isn't a touchdown. It's a hard collision with an obstacle. The landing gear and the lower fuselage slam into the stone embankment, the seawall protecting the airport from the bay water. The force of inertia at this moment is colossal. The tail section cannot withstand the stress. It shears off completely, cleanly along the line of the rear pressure bulkhead, as if cut by a giant knife. The structure disintegrates instantly. For those at the very rear of the cabin, the world flips over. Flight attendants strapped into their seats in the tail galley, and 3 passengers in the back rows, don't even have time to understand what happened. 1 second ago, they were bracing for a hard landing. Now, the floor simply vanishes beneath their feet. They are thrown from the torn fuselage directly onto the concrete and dirt. They are left lying at the runway's threshold, while the crippled, smoking hull of the plane, now tailless, continues its slide onward. Having lost its tail, the 200 tons of metal don't stop. They make a deadly leap. Deprived of the heavy rear section, the maimed Boeing violates the laws of balance. The nose of the plane hits the ground, bounces, and tosses the fuselage into the air. The airliner falls onto its belly and begins its ghastly slide across the grass, rotating around its axis. From the outside, it looks like slow motion. A giant machine makes a full 360-degree turn, a pirouette that fans debris across the entire field. At this moment, the left engine cannot withstand the monstrous lateral load. The massive turbine, the size of a small van, tears away from the wing with a grinding shriek. Torn fuel lines instantly spew kerosene onto the engine's scorching hot parts. Flame ignites. A fireball rolls alongside the fuselage, as if chasing it all the way to its stop. Inside the cabin, these seconds bring absolute chaos. Plastic latches on the overhead bins fail and burst. Heavy suitcases, bags, and duty-free packages fly out, becoming unguided projectiles ricocheting through the cabin. The lights go out, plunging everything into a twilight filled with dust and soot. From the ceiling, as if in mockery, yellow oxygen masks drop, the automation responding to depressurization, which there is no longer any reason to fear. When the screech of metal on Earth finally subsides, the plane comes to rest left of the runway. Silence falls. The most terrible silence in the lives of those inside. Passengers open their eyes and see the unbelievable. The aircraft's main body is intact. The aluminum tube withstood the impact, the leap, and the spin, preserving a living space. Most people are alive and conscious. But this pause is deceptive. Beneath the left wing, right next to the fuselage, a black, oily puddle begins to spread. Hydraulic fluid and residual fuel are leaking out. Small tongues of flame, having jumped from the severed engine, greedily lick at this slick. The survivors have only a few minutes before the life-saving cabin capsule turns into a fiery trap. The most dangerous decision after a crash is the order to wait. As the dust settles, a strange, surreal paralysis descends upon the cockpit. Captain Lee Kang-kook and the instructor are alive. They check instruments, flick switches, and call the control tower. In their minds, the plane is intact. It just made a hard landing and veered off the concrete. They cannot see that an entire fuselage section is missing from the rear, and that an engine has already turned into a torch. The senior cabin manager bursts in over the intercom or in person. "We need to evacuate." The pilot's reply is shocking. "Wait, we are assessing the situation." They are following procedure. By the book, evacuation cannot begin until the engines are shut down, or people could be sucked into the spinning turbines. But the pilots don't understand there is nothing left to assess. One engine is torn off, the other is burning. The flight attendants in the cabin see what is hidden from the flight crew. Outside the right side windows, orange flames are already raging. Smoke begins to seep inside. At this moment, the hierarchy shatters. The flight attendants take charge and start shouting, "Unbuckle your seat belts! Get out!" But the machinery delivers a new, sinister surprise. The impact twisted the fuselage structure. When the flight attendants activate the emergency exits on the right side, doors 1R and 2R, the system goes haywire. The huge inflatable slides, which are supposed to deploy outward so people can slide down, instead inflate inward into the cramped cabin. Imagine a giant rubber raft the size of a car instantly inflating inside a tiny room. The slide expands with incredible force, pinning one of the flight attendants against the bulkhead. She's trapped, crushed between the wall and a ton of pressurized air, unable to move or breathe. The exit is blocked. In the cockpit, they finally grasp the scale of the disaster. The pilots do something you usually only see in movies. They grab the emergency axe, an item that's hung in its niche for years, just in case. The captain runs into the cabin and swings the blade into the taut fabric of the slide to puncture it and release the air. Only then do they free their pinned colleague. And in the aisles, another drama unfolds. The passengers, gripped by panic, make the most common mistake. Instead of saving lives, they save their belongings. People jump up and start opening the overhead bins. They pull out suitcases, bags, packages. The aisle, already narrow and smoke-filled, turns into a bottleneck. Someone drags a huge duffel toward the exit, blocking the path for dozens behind them. The seconds that separate them from a fuel tank explosion are spent saving clothes and souvenirs. The first fire crews racing to the crash site are met with a surreal picture. The huge airliner lies on its belly, like a whale beached on the shore, surrounded by an apocalyptic landscape of twisted metal, dust, and black smoke. The ground is littered with debris, seats, and personal items that were thrown from the torn-off tail. To prevent the spilled fuel from exploding, the firefighters immediately deploy their main weapon. Special fire-suppressing foam erupts from their monitor nozzles in powerful streams. Within minutes, the disaster zone is covered in a thick layer of white substance. It looks like a sudden, heavy blizzard in the middle of a California summer. The foam effectively smothers the flames, cutting off oxygen to the kerosene, but it also creates a new, unexpected threat. It erases the landscape. The foam layer quickly reaches knee height, and in some places, waist high. Beneath this white blanket, everything disappears. The uneven ground, sharp metal shards, holes, and, most terrifyingly, the evacuation routes. Rescuers running toward the plane are forced to move almost by feel with their feet, risking tripping or falling onto hidden pieces of fuselage below. The drivers of the heavy fire trucks are in an even tougher spot. Through the windshield, they see only a white veil and billowing smoke. All landmarks on the ground are gone. They have to maneuver multi-ton trucks practically blind, relying on instinct, while people run around in panic all around them. The situation is made worse by chaos on the radio. Emergency service radio channels are overloaded. Pilots, air traffic controllers, fire crew commanders, medics, and police are all talking at once. Important commands are drowned out in the stream of noise. Someone's requesting water. Someone's reporting casualties. Someone's trying to figure out where the remaining passengers are. In this confusion, coordination shatters into fragments. Instead of a well-oiled rescue machine, a chaotic battle for lives unfolds on the field, with no one having a full picture of what's happening. The loudest question after the accident sounds frighteningly simple. How is this even possible? When the people from the NTSB, the National Transportation Safety Board, retrieve the orange flight recorders, the famous black boxes, from the wreckage, they're prepared to hear a story of mechanical failure. They're looking for an engine failure, a jammed rudder, or a navigation glitch. But decoding the data brings a shocking discovery. The aircraft was perfectly healthy. Right up to the moment it hit the seawall, the Boeing 777 worked like a Swiss watch. Not a single screw, not a single sensor, let it down. The Iron Bird followed every command from the cockpit exactly. This changes the entire course of the investigation. If the machine isn't to blame, then something broke in the people. Investigators dive into the complex logic of the onboard computer and find the key cause of the disaster. It wasn't a person, it was an algorithm. The NTSB experts found that the crew fell victim to the so-called automation trap. The pilots sincerely believed that the smart electronics, the autothrottle, would save them if the airspeed got too low. That's a standard protection feature. But they were unaware of one tiny, yet deadly nuance. In that specific descent mode they had selected, and with the autopilot manually disengaged, that protection went into sleep mode. The computer thought the pilots wanted to fly slowly and obediently, waited for new commands as the plane descended. And the pilots thought the computer was monitoring the speed. This discovery elevates the investigation to a global problem in modern aviation. The NTSB calls it automation dependency. It turns out Captain Lee Kang-kook, despite his vast experience, was afraid of a visual approach. He was used to the computer doing everything for him. Years of flying by electronic cues meant he had, as instructors say, lost his touch. His skill for feeling the energy of a 200-ton machine had atrophied, like muscles without exercise. He was looking at the instruments, but not seeing the danger, expecting the smart system to correct any mistake. The investigator's verdict sounds like a warning to the entire industry. Pilots had forgotten how to be pilots. They had become computer operators, and the moment the computer simply stepped back, the human was unprepared to take control. Sometimes the world needs a major shock to see an obvious truth. The San Francisco crash doesn't just add to the statistics, it turns a page in the history of pilot training. The industry suddenly realizes, in the pursuit of computer perfection, we lost something human. The term automation dependency stops being a topic for theoretical debate and becomes a grim reality that must be confronted here and now. Airlines worldwide get a harsh signal. Give pilots back their control yokes. Training programs are urgently rewritten. Now it's not enough to just know which button to press on the control panel. Pilots are literally forced to turn off the airliner's electronic brains and fly by hand. A mandatory requirement for manual flying hours is introduced. It's like training at the gym. If you stop walking and only ride escalators, your muscles atrophy. Aviation decides to give pilots back their flying muscles. The Boeing Corporation doesn't stay on the sidelines either. Engineers and training specialists revise thick volumes of flight documentation. Critically important clarifications are added to the Boeing 777 manual. That very hold mode, which became the hidden cause of Flight 214's crash, gets a detailed description with bold warnings. Now every cadet sitting in the 777 seat knows, in this mode, the plane won't save itself. The story of Asiana Flight 214 becomes a textbook example of a cruel paradox. We created technology so reliable it lets humans relax. But that very comfort hides a trap. The perfect silence in the cockpit and the smooth flight lull vigilance better than any sleeping pill. The tragedy on runway 28 establishes a golden rule now hammered into every rookie's head. No matter how smart your plane is, you don't have the right to be a passenger in it. A pilot must always be mentally ahead of their machine. If the plane is flying to point B, the pilot's brain should already be at point C. Because when the computer suddenly goes silent, only a human can turn a fall back into flight. But behind these new rules lies a concrete cost. That sunny day in San Francisco divides the fates of 307 people into before and after. The statistics of this crash are frightening and yet border on a miracle. Out of the 307 people on board, 304 survived. For world aviation, 3 lives cut short are a reminder that cannot be ignored. The technology can be perfect, the weather ideal, and the aircraft the most reliable in the world. But in the end, flight safety doesn't rest on microchips, but on the hands and attention of the one sitting in the cockpit.